Advice becomes control when listening is not enough and obedience becomes the price of care. The practical test is whether advice expands your options and can tolerate you choosing differently. Someone offers a suggestion. You thank them and choose another path. The advice returns as warnings, disappointment, and pressure to ask permission next time. The first distinction around the advice is consent, because information may be offered while ownership of the next choice must remain visible. The pattern here is guidance that quietly replaces ownership of the decision. Psychologically, concern can make disagreement feel reckless, so repeated warnings slowly train the listener to outsource judgment, which lets emotional pressure arrive before anyone has examined the suggestion. Maybe every alternative is described as a disaster until their preferred choice feels like the only responsible option. That first example matters because the suggestion sounds ordinary, while the hidden cost appears only after resistance. Maybe they say they are only helping, but treat a different decision as proof you do not value them. The second example shows why repetition around that guidance matters, because a fair misunderstanding becomes clearer while pressure keeps protecting the same outcome. Map the autonomy test in order. A suggestion becomes control when choosing differently is treated as disloyalty. The sequence behind the autonomy test is more reliable than a guess about motive. The next useful distinction for the repeated warning is this: separate information that expands options from pressure that replaces judgment. That distinction keeps the repeated warning tied to observable behavior. A practical response starts here. I hear your advice. I am going to make the final choice myself. Say it once, and watch whether decision ownership becomes clearer or simply finds another route back to the demanded outcome. The evidence test for the advice is whether questions produce clear reasons, stable risks, more than one option, and room for your values instead of more guilt or urgency. One tense exchange around the suggestion proves very little. Concern rises when the suggestion forms a repeatable structure where a reasonable alternative keeps disappearing. Slow that guidance down by writing the request, the offered options, the missing option, and the consequence attached to disagreement. A healthy misunderstanding about the autonomy test usually creates room for correction. Pressure often makes that clarity inconvenient. Use this reality check for the repeated warning. Repeated advice, catastrophic predictions, and growing permission-seeking reveal when guidance has started replacing independent judgment. Exact wording around the repeated warning exposes what an emotional summary may hide. The aftermath of the conversation matters too. Ask whether the interaction gave you usable information or merely made you more afraid to choose differently, compare sources, pause, or keep the final decision. Do not overstate what the advice proves. An imperfect exchange involving the advice can still improve without becoming a control pattern. The threshold is crossed when the suggestion repeatedly makes autonomy, verification, or another reasonable option feel disloyal. A small experiment can clarify that guidance. Pause before responding to that guidance, request one concrete fact, or state one narrow limit, then observe the response. If the conversation is repairable, the response can tolerate specifics and a slower decision without erasing the autonomy test. When pressure protects the autonomy test, the delay often becomes the new offense. Keep safety ahead of proving anything about the repeated warning. For a risky test of the repeated warning, use written communication, distance, trusted support, or qualified help. A boundary around decision ownership is not a diagnosis. It is your decision about what evidence and process you require before making the final decision. Remember this protection rule. Do not confuse receiving information with transferring ownership of the decision. Good advice gives the listener more information, not less ownership. It can be direct, emotional, or strongly worded, but it leaves the final decision where it belongs. Pressure often appears after the advice is acknowledged. You heard it, considered it, and chose differently. Now the conversation repeats because listening was never the actual requirement. Agreement was. Catastrophizing can narrow the room. Every alternative is framed as dangerous, foolish, or guaranteed to fail. Fear makes the preferred option feel like responsibility instead of preference. Another sign is relational punishment. Choosing differently becomes proof that you do not trust, love, or value the advisor. Your decision is no longer evaluated on its merits. It becomes a referendum on the relationship. Ask for options rather than a verdict. What are the benefits, risks, and unknowns? What would change your recommendation? Advice that can answer those questions is easier to use without surrendering judgment. You can acknowledge concern without accepting control. I know you care, and I understand your reasons. I am still making this choice myself. That sentence does not reject the person. It restores ownership. Watch whether the advisor can remain supportive after a different choice. They may disagree, and they may set their own boundaries. What they should not need is authority over a decision that belongs to you. For high-stakes choices, widen the input. Use qualified professionals, written evidence, and more than one perspective. Dependence grows when one person becomes the only permitted source of wisdom. The point is not to ignore advice. It is to use advice as information rather than permission. The healthiest advisor wants your judgment to become stronger, even when the final answer is not theirs. The final test is simple. After the conversation, do you understand the options better, or do you only feel more afraid to disappoint the person who advised you? One builds clarity, the other builds compliance. Repeated advice can create learned hesitation. You begin checking every choice with the same person, not because they are always right, but because acting independently now feels emotionally expensive. That dependence may look like closeness. The advisor is consulted first, knows every detail, and feels essential. The hidden cost appears when you cannot make a normal decision without rehearsing their reaction. Try making one low-stakes choice without asking for approval. You can share the decision afterward if you want. The experiment shows whether consultation was useful or whether permission had quietly become the real function. Do not confuse expertise with ownership. A professional can know more about a subject and still respect informed consent. Strong advice should improve the quality of your decision, not erase your right to make it. When someone predicts disaster, ask for probability and evidence. What exactly is likely to happen? How would we know? What reasonable alternative would they accept? Specific risk is easier to evaluate than emotional catastrophe. Advice can also be controlling when it is selective. The advisor praises independence when it matches their preference and calls it impulsive when it does not. The principle changes with the desired outcome. Healthy guidance has an exit. You can thank the person, stop discussing the choice, and return later without being punished. If the conversation cannot end until you agree, the advice is no longer merely information. The strongest support helps you build your own decision process. It asks what matters to you, what evidence you have, what risks you accept, and what next step you can live with. It does not need to become your inner voice. Sometimes the best answer is, I am not deciding today. Time gives you room to compare sources, notice your own priorities, and see whether the advisor respects reflection or intensifies the pressure. If you later decide the advice was right, that does not prove the pressure was healthy. Good outcomes do not erase a controlling process. You can value accurate information and still require autonomy in how decisions are made. The goal is not isolation. Wise people seek counsel. The difference is that counsel strengthens the decision-maker, while control makes the advisor increasingly necessary for every next step. A useful review question is whether the advisor can summarize your priorities accurately, even when those priorities lead somewhere else. Respectful guidance stays curious about your values. Control keeps translating your values until they support the advisor's preferred answer. Notice what happens after a reasonable decision goes well without their approval. A supportive person can update their view and be glad the outcome worked. A controlling advisor may search for a new danger because accepting the result would mean accepting your independent judgment. Advice should also match the stakes. Strong warnings make sense when harm is immediate and evidence is clear. The same intensity around ordinary preferences can turn every small choice into an emergency where someone else claims the deciding vote. You can keep the useful part and reject the pressure around it. Write down the evidence, compare it with another source, and decide later. Separating the information from the relationship reaction lets good advice remain useful without rewarding repeated control. The final measure is not whether you always choose alone. It is whether consultation leaves you more capable of choosing. When the conversation ends, your reasons should be clearer, your options should still exist, and the decision should still feel like yours. End with agency. Useful advice survives the listener choosing differently because guidance should strengthen autonomy. A viewer learning about the advice should leave with a clearer next choice, not a scarier label. If this made the pattern clearer, subscribe for more practical psychology breakdowns like this.